that matter, and desired negative things for her.
These motherfuckers are the snakes in our country, fucking us on a daily basis.
But they also thought she was going to win. Was it your testimony that all of the information stolen was not publicly disseminated?
Come on, Gowdy.
No, I said
ask him a closed-ended question, yes or no.
As I think was implied.
Don't give him an option to fucking explain anything.
The effort to try to further hurt her, if she became president, that information, any type of derogatory information about her, could have been husbanded for post-election period.
All right, but do you know if negative information was husband, to use your word, and not disseminated?
I think that would be inappropriate to talk about in an open session like this.
Is it inappropriate to both? I get not asking you about the nature of it. Is it inappropriate to answer yes or no whether or not that information
finally good yes or no
was husband but not disseminated?
My request would be that we could talk about that in closed session.
Okay, I'll honor your request and we'll talk about it in a little bit.
Good job, Gowdy. Good job, Brody.
Mr. Castro,
thank you for fucking listening,
thank you,
bro.
Director Brennan,
thank
for
you.
Your testimony here today.
Gowdy for Director FBI, bro.
The intelligence agencies have been berated by the president for the possibility about leaking in the intelligence agencies.
I know that there have been a number of allegations made
another piece of
about
shit.
Intelligence officials being responsible for those leaks. Yes, I'm aware of
that. Are you aware of a story that came out yesterday that said, quote, 3 White House staffers have been identified for leaking classified info. POTUS will fire, quote, multiple people when he returns to D.C.
I'm unaware of that.
And you're one of them.
Facts, if any, underneath
you
it.
fucking snake.
If the story is true, and we don't know whether it is or not, but if it's true that there may have been people who leaked classified info at the White House, first, could you tell us, it seems like an obvious question, should be an obvious answer. Are there people at the White House that would have classified information that they could leak to journalists?
White House officials, if they have the appropriate security clearances based on their position, they would have access to classified information, yes.
Okay. And then the second part of that is, if the White House has determined that leaks are coming from within their operation, could you tell us how they would go about determining that? How would they figure out that they have leakers in the White House?
If there is a sense that there are unauthorized disclosures of classified information from within the White House, I think it's imperative that the FBI be brought into the matter so that there can be an appropriate investigation to determine whether or not that conduct was criminal or not. And there shouldn't be just a independent investigation that takes place. They can do some efforts to try to contain any hemorrhaging of information, but it really is the responsibility of law enforcement and the Bureau to investigate criminal leaks of classified information.
Oh, thank you. Now, I have some questions about the IC assessment itself and the declassified report, because there has been a lot of disinformation and confusion about the intelligence assessment, and it's been attacked also. So, Mr. Brennan, when did the IC start warning about the Russian threat, and how was the assessment produced? Do you believe that the people working on it had the requisite skills and expertise to write such an important assessment?
Well, the intelligence community assessment that was produced in early January was initiated by President Obama in early December to ensure that there was going to be a full accounting of Russian activities, and directed that there be a classified and unclassified version of that.
What's up, everybody?
The effort to uncover the Russian activities
we have right here in our own
place
country.
Prior to
the king of the snakes,
that.
CIA Brennan.
In both instances, I believe that the right people with the requisite
just to let you know, he's
array
an
of
Islamic
skills were
Muslim
involved
himself.
in the initial collection effort and assessment effort about Russian activities up to and even in the aftermath of the election in November.
You could thank Obama for that.
And then there were additional individuals who were added to a group that could draft that assessment so that it could be produced in early January.
And let me ask you, how and why did all 3 agencies come to such a high degree of confidence about their assessment?
I think that they rigorously interrogated the data, very careful and deep discussions about what the data told them about their assessments, and so therefore there was a unanimous consensus among the three agencies and the ODNI about the judgments. There was one variation as far as the NSA's confidence level in terms of the Russian advocacy for Mr. Trump, but with that lone exception, it was a consensus assessment.
And the report also talked extensively about the role of WikiLeaks in working with Russia on this covert action campaign. Can you talk a bit more about how they fit in?
Well, I think as the assessment says that the Russians used a cutout for the WikiLeaks exposure. And when you look at the WikiLeaks releases over time, you can see that sometimes they are timed to coincide with certain events, and they, I think, are always intended to undermine U.S. national security. And Russian protests that they are not working with WikiLeaks, and WikiLeaks protests they're not working with the Russians, I think on both parts are disingenuous.
And then let me ask my final question, because I'm running out of time.
He just called WikiLeaks a lie, guys. You heard that?
Potential leaking. What surveillance methods would
He
the
just
president
called
of the White
WikiLeaks
House have
a lie.
authorization to engage in on its own staffers?
The only thing that's been on
that would be
point for
legal?
12 years,
And where might they cross the
he
line?
calls them a liar. The king of lies,
I'm not a
CIA,
lawyer, and,
calling WikiLeaks a
You
liar.
have to go to the Department of Justice and the FBI in terms of what statutory authorities they might have, which I...
And then you have this other Democratic
just
piece
am
of
not
shit
aware.
asking him stupid
Thank you,
fucking
Director.
questions like an asshole.
Massage expired. Mr.
Fucking
Stewart, 5
faggots.
minutes. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Director, for, again, your many years of service. I'm going to go very quickly because I want to
Remember these people. Yeah, take screenshots of all these motherfuckers here.
I want to go through and
There's
make
like only
point
one
that's
guy
the
that I
point
can
we're
trust in
taking,
here.
but
It's just
before I
Gowdy.
do, I'm just going
Trey
to add
Gowdy.
that I've reviewed the raw intelligence of the
He needs to
CIA
be the next
regarding
FBI
the
director.
analysis of whether they preferred Mr. Trump.
We need
I
to tweet
don't
that shit
agree
to
with
Trump,
the conclusion,
big time.
particularly that it's such a high level of confidence. I just think there should have been allowances made for some of the ambiguity in that, and especially for those who didn't also share in the conclusion that it was a high degree of confidence. But having said that, I do think we can agree that Russia wants a weakened U.S. president. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Yes, certainly. And in regards
Well, you
to
can
the
answer yes to that,
second,
right?
said
You
that
fucking
their primary
piece of
goal
shit.
seemed to be to work to weaken her candidacy so that she would be a weakened U.S. president. My question to you is, would the same thing be true now? Would Russia want a weakened U.S. president, Mr. Trump?
Well, I think they want to be able to weaken U.S. policies, especially on the international stage. I do think that there is an interest on the part of the Russians to improve relations with the United States, and I do think it's important that relations between Washington and Moscow be improved because...
But even if they want improved relationships, they would want that on their terms as much as able, and that would be better accomplished by having a weakened U.S. president, regardless of who it is. Wouldn't you say that's true?
One can argue the point, or that a stronger president is able to make have an accommodation with Russia out of strength as opposed to out of weakness.
Okay, I would agree with you that there are some circumstances, but I think in general, a weakened U.S., a weakened U.S. Western influence in the world, and a weakened U.S. president is in their interest. And I'll just conclude with this.
For sure.
These active measures, the propaganda, the false news reports, etc., they don't end with the U.S. election. And I think it's appropriate that we would warn the American people that
Yes,
these
really.
active measures, again,
Trump is a billion times
propaganda,
better than
fake
Hillary.
news stories, etc.,
If you
would
think
be
otherwise, you're the problem.
applicable today as well, and that they would be trying to weaken our U.S. president.
Anybody who's here already warned you. If you're going to be a fucking troll, you have nothing positive to say to this,
Yes,
or
sure.
something,
Thank you.
don't fucking come here trolling, because I will fucking block you.
Over to, I believe, Mr. Gowdy.
I think we're fair from Utah. Director Brennan, why is it important to protect the identity of U.S. persons as part of our surveillance programs?
Because there is, I think, a right of all Americans to privacy, and that sometimes information is collected about U.S. persons who may or may not be involved in any manner of criminal activity. And therefore, respecting that privacy of U.S. citizens, the intelligence community goes to great lengths to cover the identities of U.S. persons if they happen
You
to
don't
be
understand what's going on?
intelligence collection.
Because you're a fucking troll.
For all
You're
those
stupid.
reasons and others, and again, we're not talking about leaks. We're talking about masking within the intelligence community, right? We're not talking about reading it on the front page of newspapers.
Trey Gowdy should be the next FBI guy.
Prohibitions that you
He's
place
gonna go after
on
these
yourself
motherfuckers one at a
with
time.
respect to identifying U.S. persons as part of our surveillance programs, right?
That's correct.
All right.
Yes.
And you just cited some of the very important reasons that we do that, and I would assume that there is a process, a protocol under which the intelligence community goes through if they seek to unmask a U.S. person.
I love Gowdy like I love Trump.
That's correct.
He's a fucking badass motherfucker.
Have you ever requested that a U.S. person's name be unmasked?
Get that motherfucker, Gowdy.
Yes, I have.
Have you
Finish him!
Either approved or denied request of others that a U.S. person's name be unmasked?
I don't recall in my tenure at CIA any
Gowdy.
decision on unmasking for someone else coming up to my level. It would have been, that decision would have been made at a lower level within the agency.
Are you aware of any requests within the community that were denied?
Hell yeah. Fucking A. Give hearts to Ronaldo, guys.
Do not.
I want to see some hearts.
I didn't have visibility into requests that were being made across the government,
Gowdy's
so
a fucking patriot.
I don't recall one that I was denied.
Do you recall any U.S. ambassadors asking that names be unmasked?
I don't know.
Fucking stuttering lying prick.
But I'm not. I could not answer with any confidence.
Do you remember what your last day on the job was at the CIA? What was the date?
It was noon on January 20th when I gave up my responsibilities as director of CIA.
On either January 19th or up till noon on January the 20th?
Not only fire him, put him in fucking jail. It's a big 7-foot monster named Bubba to fuck him in the ass.
So you did not make any request on the last day that you were employed?
No, I was not in the agency on the last day I was employed. I definitely know that on the last day I was employed, I definitely did not make such a request.
Thank you, Director.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Crawford, 5 minutes. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Heck. Mr. Heck,
Mr. Chairman.
I just want to make sure you're awake down there, Mr. Heck.
All over it, Mike. Thank you, sir. Director Brennan, thanks for being here. I want to freely confess to you that there's an element to this Russian investigation with which I've struggled, and it is this. How do I explain why this should matter and why people should care? What words do I use to explain this to folks who have a lot of other things on their mind? Things like their kids, like keeping their job, like managing their debt, like caring for an elderly parent. Why should people care that the Russians hack into our computers and then selectively disclose that information with the express purpose of swaying an election? Why should they care that the Russians are doing this in other Western democracies and will continue to do so, by the way, at minimal investment? That's the precise question that I actually put to then Director Comey and Admiral Rogers when they were with us in March. I now pose it to you, sir. So not for my sake, but for America's sake, as someone who has devoted your entire life to public service, in your own words, please tell my constituents, my neighbors, why they should care, not just here in Washington, D.C., but in Washington State and Texas and Connecticut and points in between. Why should they care? Why do you care, sir?
Because for the last 241 years, this nation and its citizens have cherished the freedom and liberty that this country was
founded upon. There goes the feelings. Oh,
many
why should
Americans,
the people care?
Americans over the years
Why
have
should
lost
the
their
people
lives
care? Here's your feelings. Fuck your feelings, you piece of shit.
They've lost their lives also to protect the freedom and liberties
Get to the
of
fucking
other
facts,
countries
you
and other
fucking
peoples
jerk
around
off.
the world. Our ability to choose our elected leaders as we see fit is, I believe, an inalienable right that we must protect with all
Did
of
Russians
our
go into our voting booth and vote for Trump?
And the fact that the Russians tried to influence that election so that the will of the American people was not going to be realized by that election, I find outrageous and something that we need to, with every last ounce of devotion to the country, resist
propaganda bullshit
and
right
to
now.
try to act to prevent further instances of that. And so,
You're so
therefore,
passionate.
I believe that this
Oh
is
my God,
something
look
that's
at him.
critically important to every American.
It's so important.
It's very important to me, for my children and grandchildren, to make sure that never again will a foreign country try to influence and interfere in the foundation stone of this country, which is electing our democratic leaders.
Is everybody here a patriot?
In other words, sir,
Does everybody here love America? Press 1 if you love our country and you're a true fucking patriot.
I believe much is at stake here, including the following: whether America will have elections that we can trust, that are continuing measures of self-determination free from foreign interference,